Hi, kids. Welcome to another episode of Bedtime Stories with Uncle Joe. Tonight, we're taking a look at several short stories, also known as fables, uh, originally penned by the Greek storyteller Aesop. And I'm taking this from the Aesop for Children. A lot of these fables are very short. They feature animals interacting with each other, and there's a lesson or a moral behind each one. Parents, I suggest that you talk to your kids about the moral of each story, and we can go into it a little bit as we talk about each story in depth. The first story I have tonight is called The Fox and the Grapes. A fox one day spied a beautiful bunch of ripe grapes hanging from a vine trained along the branches of a tree. The grapes seemed ready to burst with juice, and the fox's mouth watered as he gazed longingly at them. The bunch hung from a high branch, and the fox had to jump for it. The first time he jumped, he missed it by a long way, so he walked off a short distance and took a running leap at it, only to fall short once more. Again and again he tried, but in vain. Now he sat down and looked at the grapes in disgust. "What a fool I am," he said. "Here I am wearing myself out to get a bunch of sour grapes that are not worth gaping for." And off he walked, very, very scornfully. The moral of the story is, there are many who pretend to despise and belittle that which is beyond their reach. The idea being that if you can't do something, or something isn't readily available to you at the time, it may not be yours at that moment. Doesn't mean it's out of your reach, doesn't mean it won't come to you if you keep trying. But the whole moral is, some people just give up too easy and give up something that they would have really enjoyed or something they really would have liked to do simply because it was hard. So just because something is hard doesn't mean it's not worth fighting for or working for. The next story is called The Crow and the Pitcher. In a spell of dry weather, when the birds could find very little to drink, a thirsty crow found a pitcher with a little water in it. But the pitcher was high and had a narrow neck, and no matter how he tried, the crow could not reach the water. The poor thing felt as if he must die of thirst. Then an idea came to him. Picking up some small pebbles, he dropped them into the pitcher one by one. With each pebble, the water rose a little higher, until at last it was near enough so he could drink. The moral of the story is, in a pinch, a good use of our wits may help us out. I've also known this to mean necessity is the mother of invention, which means you can usually find a way to solve a problem if you work hard enough, as such as the crow did with the pitcher that had not enough water in it. Our next story is called The Wolf in Sheep's Clothing. A certain wolf could not get enough to eat because of the watchfulness of the shepherds. But one night he found a sheepskin that had been cast aside and forgotten. The next day, dressed in the skin, the wolf strolled into the pasture with the sheep. Soon, a little lamb was following him about and was quickly led away to slaughter. That evening, the wolf entered the fold with the flock. But it happened that the shepherd took a fancy for mutton broth that very evening and, picking up a knife, went to the fold. There, the first he laid his hands on and killed was the wolf. The moral of the story is, the evildoer often comes to harm through his own deceit. He pretended he was a sheep, and sheep are usually meant to be killed off for food and for their wool. This is also an example of irony, in that the first sheep that the shepherd found for slaughter was right after the wolf in sheep's clothing joined the flock. Our next story was something Kind of familiar to most of you. We all know the story of the hare and the tortoise, or the tortoise and the hare. A hare was making fun of a tortoise one day for being so slow. "Do you ever get anywhere?" he asked with a mocking laugh. "Yes," replied the tortoise, "and I get there sooner than you think. I'll run you a race and prove it." The hare was much amused at the idea of running a race with the tortoise, but for the fun of the thing, he agreed. So a fox, who had consented to act as judge, marked the distance and started the runners off. The hare was soon far out of sight, and to make the tortoise feel very deeply how ridiculous it was for him to try a race with a hare, he laid down beside the course to take a nap until the tortoise should catch up. The tortoise, meanwhile, kept going slowly but steadily, and after a time, passed the place where the hare was sleeping. But the hare slept on very peacefully, and when at last he did wake up, the tortoise was near the goal. The hare now ran his swiftest, but he could not overtake the tortoise in time. The moral of this story is the race is not always to the swiftest. I've also known this to be slow and steady wins the race. Take your time, do your best, and it may not matter how long it takes you, but getting to the goal is the most important. Our next story is The Dog and His Reflection. A dog, to whom the butcher had thrown a bone, was hurrying home with his prize as fast as he could go. As he crossed a narrow footbridge, he happened to look down and saw himself reflected in the quiet water, as if in a mirror. But the greedy dog thought he saw a real dog carrying a bone much bigger than his own. If he had stopped to think, he would have known better. But instead of thinking, he dropped his bone and sprang at the dog in the river, only to find himself swimming for dear life to reach the shore. At last, he managed to scramble out. As he stood sadly thinking about the good bone he had lost, he realized what a stupid dog he had been. The moral of the story is, it is very foolish to be greedy. Our next story is The Wolf and the Kid. The kid in this case is a baby goat. There was once a little kid whose growing horns made him think he was a grown-up billy goat and able to take care of himself. So one evening when the flock started home from the pasture and his mother called, the kid paid no heed and kept right on nibbling the tender grass. A little later, when he lifted his head, the flock was gone. He was all alone. The sun was sinking. Long shadows came creeping over the ground. A chilly little wind came creeping with them, making scary noises in the grass. The kid shivered as he thought of the terrible wolf. Then he started wildly over the field, bleating for his mother. But not halfway, near a clump of trees, there was the wolf. The kid knew there was little hope for him. "Please, Mr. Wolf," he said, trembling, "I know you're going to eat me, but first, please pipe me a tune, for I want to dance and be merry as long as I can." The wolf liked the idea of a little music before eating, so he struck up a merry tune, and the kid leaped and frisked gaily. Meanwhile, the flock was moving slowly homeward. In the still evening air, the wolf's piping carried far. The shepherd dogs perked up their ears. They recognized the song the wolf sings before a feast, and in a moment they were racing back to the pasture. The wolf's song ended suddenly, and as he ran with the dog at his heels, he called himself a fool for turning piper to please a kid when he should have stuck to his butcher's trade. The moral of the story is, do not let anything turn you from your purpose. Our next story is called The Vain Jackdaw. A jackdaw is a crow, and his borrowed feathers. A jackdaw chanced to fly over the garden of the king's palace. There, he saw with much wonder and envy a flock of royal peacocks in all the glory of their splendid plumage. Now, the black jackdaw was not a very handsome bird, nor very refined in manner. Yet, he imagined that all he needed to make himself fit for the society of the peacocks was a dress like theirs. So he picked up some cast-off feathers of the peacocks and stuck them among his own black plumes. Dressed in his borrowed finery, he strutted loftily among the birds of his own kind. Then he flew down into the garden among the peacocks. But they soon saw who he was. Angry at the cheat, they flew at him, plucking away the borrowed feathers and also some of his own. The poor jackdaw returned sadly to his former companions. There, another unpleasant surprise awaited him. They had not forgotten his superior airs toward them, and to punish him, they drove him away with a rain of pecks and jeers. The moral of the story is, borrowed feathers do not make fine birds. You can also take this to mean, don't be upset or think less of where you come from or who you are. Everything and everyone is special in their own way. Our next story is one that you're probably familiar with through other authors, other iterations. It's called The Goose and the Golden Egg. There was once a countryman who possessed the most wonderful goose you can imagine. For every day when he visited the nest, the goose had laid a beautiful, glittering golden egg. The countryman took the eggs to market and soon began to get rich. But it was not long before he grew impatient with the goose because she gave him only a single golden egg a day. He was not getting rich fast enough. Then one day, after he had finished counting his money, the idea came to him that he could get all the golden eggs at once by killing the goose and cutting it open. But when the deed was done, not a single golden egg did he find, and the precious goose was dead. The moral of the story is, those who have plenty want more, and so they lose all they have. This is a classic example of greed. And if you get too greedy, instead of getting what you want, you may lose what you already have. Another story about greed is the mouse and the weasel. A little hungry mouse found his way one day into a basket of corn. He had to squeeze himself a good deal to get through the narrow opening between the strips of the basket. But the corn was tempting, and the mouse was determined to get in. When at last he had succeeded, he gorged himself to bursting. Indeed, he became about 3 times as big around the middle as when he went in. At last he felt satisfied and dragged himself to the opening to get out again. But the best he could do was to get his head out. So there he sat, groaning and moaning, both from the discomfort inside him and his anxiety to escape from the basket. Just then a weasel came by. He understood the situation quickly. "My friend," he said, "I know what you've been doing. You've been stuffing. That's what you get. You will have to stay there till you feel just like you did when you went in. Good night, and good enough for you." And that was all the sympathy the poor mouse got. Moral of the story: greediness leads to misfortune. And the last story among the theme of greed talks about the flies and the honey. A jar of honey was upset, turned over, and the sticky sweetness flowed out onto the table. The sweet smell of the honey soon brought a large number of flies buzzing around. They didn't wait for an invitation. No, indeed. They settled right down, feet and all, to gorge themselves. The flies were quickly smeared from head to foot with honey. Their wings stuck together. They could not pull their feet out of the sticky mass, and so they died, giving their lives for the sake of a taste of sweetness. The moral of the story is, be not greedy for a little passing pleasure. It may destroy you. Our last story is called The Eagle and the Kite. An eagle sat high in the branches of a great oak. She seemed very sad and drooping for an eagle. A kite saw her. "Why do you look so woebegone?" asked the kite. "I want to get married," replied the eagle, "and I can't find a mate who can provide for me as I should like." "Take me," said the kite. "I am very strong, stronger even than you." "Do you really think you can provide for me?" asked the eagle eagerly. "Why, of course," replied the kite. "That would be a very simple matter. I am so strong I can carry away an ostrich in my talons as if it were a feather." The eagle accepted the kite immediately, but after the wedding, when the kite flew away to find something to eat for his bride, all he had when he returned was a tiny mouse. "Is this the ostrich you talked about?" said the eagle in disgust. "To win you, I would have said and promised anything," replied the kite. Everything is fair when in love.